TED Talks have been deservedly mocked over the years, given how often they involve incredibly self-satisfied, incredibly privileged individuals who have just learned how to do public speaking rather than actually imparting anything useful to their audience. But TED was back in the news last week when two of their fellows resigned following the announcement that billionaire Bill Ackman would be a speaker for TED. And his announcement as a speaker isn't particularly surprising. He fulfills the criteria of what TED tends to have of speakers pretty closely. But recently, he's been stirring up some real controversy. And that controversy is focused on his campaign to remove the president of Harvard University. Claudine Gay only became the president of Harvard back in last July, and it wasn't long until she was dragged into Congress to answer for what Congress saw as rising anti-Semitism on campus at Ivy League universities. And her response to one question specifically about hate crime against Jewish people was poor, saying that aggressively anti-Semitic content would be considered as against the code of conduct at Harvard under certain contexts when that speech became conduct. However, the problem here is that the reasons why people on the left consider that to be a problem and the reason why people on the right consider it to be a problem are different reasons. You see, the left critique is that speech is conduct. What you say can itself be harassment. It can be bullying and intimidation to say something. The reason the right thought it was a problem is because it was a black woman they saw as defending anti-Semitism and especially anti-Israel speech. And Bill Ackman, the billionaire, decided to make it his personal mission to remove Claudine Gay from office, and he campaigned heavily on that basis. But it wasn't long before his pitch that she should be removed for that answer changed to an attack on her academic credentials. Specifically, the claim that she'd plagiarized her dissertation. And it turned out that some of her dissertation was poorly cited and definitely shouldn't have been passed in the state it was in. This isn't quite plagiarism. But as the furor grew, she eventually resigned from office. Not really because she accepted that her academic credentials were stained by this association with plagiarism, more that this ongoing campaign against her was more than the job was worth. And this could well have been the end of the story. A white billionaire successfully hounded a black academic leader out of office. But see, there was a little bit more going on behind the scenes, because Bill Ackman didn't come up with the evidence that would drive Claudine Gay from office. This came from one of his associates, Christopher Rufo. Chris Rufo was not quiet about how directly he was involved in driving out Claudine Gay. And it takes very little internet digging to find out that this was the plan all along, to weaponize the focus on academic credentials of the left and especially of mainstream news in the United States. And media outlets like the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, Julie reported heavily on these accusations of plagiarism. This despite being that Rufo has been incredibly open about his incentives for launching such an attack on a black academic. His entire existence is dedicated to an assault on diversity and a diversity of ideas in academia. And he has been open about the kind of tactics that he uses in order to demonize concepts like critical race theory. If you wonder why the alt-right continues to use the term critical race theory to describe everything they hate about the idea that white people aren't raised up as the chosen people of the United States, a lot of that runs back to Chris Rufo. So, Bill Ackman ended up being little more than the chosen tool of Rufo to remove a black academic that he saw as being a linchpin in the progression of ideas in American universities. This was never actually about plagiarism. It wasn't even about anti-Semitism. It was about an ongoing campaign by the right to silence ideas they dislike in the American academic system. And this, it turns out, would come back to bite Bill Ackman, because he didn't think through what he was doing when he started that campaign and took up that story set by Rufo to bring down Claudine Gay. You see, Bill Ackman's wife, Neri Oxman, is a celebrity academic with a background from MIT. And shortly after Ackman successfully drove Claudine Gay out of office, allegations began to emerge that his wife had been committing even worse plagiarism. Allegations that began to come out immediately after Bill Ackman, her husband, had been screaming from the rooftops about how Claudine Gay's plagiarism made her completely unfit for any academic role. And we're not talking minor plagiarism here. We're talking extensively throughout her dissertation. Her doctoral thesis was filled with this kind of material, to an extent significantly more severe than that of Claudine Gay. And given she had built her entire career on her academic background, this certainly threw a lot of her work into doubt. And what's worse, it started to come out via other sources that those she plagiarized from themselves could not be trusted. This was worse than the case of just a few missing citations. This was bordering on a case of an entire career built on academic fraud. Unsurprisingly, since his wife started coming to the spotlight, Ackman has been attacking literally everyone around him. Attacking the journalists involved, attacking the academic institutions involved, and backpedaling hard on his suggestion that plagiarism should make someone unfit for academic duties. But this brazen hypocrisy takes us back to the word go and the reminder that all of this was in bad faith. The right continue to campaign on the idea that they care about free speech, and yet the moment someone expresses themselves in a way that they dislike, they want them shut down, they want them facing consequences. They place stories and whip up false outrage that they know will gain traction from the left, because their criticisms were never good faith in the first place. Bill Ackman never really cared about plagiarism. Chris Rufo never really cared about free speech on campuses. This was never a campaign about principles. It was a campaign about using what power they had to silence critics and force people out of influence who they were ideologically opposed to. This is at the core of the right. Their campaigns are very rarely about principles. They are always about power, and specifically wielding power over others. And wherever and whenever they get pushback, where they get resistance, where they feel they cannot express their power enough, they will use any techniques they have to remove the barriers to that. And if that makes them hypocrites, so be it. They do not care. And it's about time that people across the spectrum, but especially our media, stopped taking their claims of principles seriously, because they have not and will never care about free speech or academic principles. But those like Chris Rufo definitely do care about making sure that anyone who isn't white knows their place, and their place is under his boot.